Everybody, welcome to the video. It's my first look for Week 15 of the NFL season over on Draftkings. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And while you're at it, you might as well hit that notification bell as well, so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And YouTube tells me around 50% of the people who watch these videos have not yet subscribed. So if you're a frequent visitor of the channel, or if you're just new and you like what you see, consider that subscribe button because it really helps the channel grow. And that's obviously going to help me out as well. If you want to follow the socials, in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. If you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that if you want access into this entire spreadsheet. And I think that's it. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. And up top, we have Patrick Mahomes at $700, the best quarterback in football and pretty much the best offense in football. Although I will say he left the door open for Aaron Rodgers to win that MVP award last week after throwing 3 interceptions and taking a 30-yard sack versus Miami. We don't usually see Mahomes making those kind of plays, but hey, it happens to the best of them. And I'm really excited to see who wins that MVP award because that race is very, very tight. Rodgers had a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal game versus Detroit, and it's probably going to come down to who ends the season stronger. So I'm really excited to see how that ends up. But Mahomes, he's a fine option here versus New Orleans, but I am viewing as more of a tournament play than a cash play, and his weapons are very expensive as well. Travis Kelce is now into the $8,000 range, which is not something we've seen all season yet. And Tyreek Hill is nearly $9,000, just south of that, I believe, at $8,800, although we'll see him at the wide receiver position a little bit. But yeah, it's going to be pretty hard to stack the Kansas City Chiefs here, and it's a pretty tough matchup versus the Saints. They've got a good defense. They're good versus the run, and they're good versus the pass. Second DVA versus the pass this season, only allowing the third fewest points per game to the quarterback position. I know Jalen Hurts had a good game last week, but he offers you rushing upside. That's something Patrick Mahomes doesn't really do. I know he's averaging 20 rushing yards per game, but he's not going to go out there and run the ball 10 plus times and get 100 rushing yards. That's not really just not really his thing. But he'll still throw for around 400 passing yards pretty much each and every single week. And I should mention last week where he had 3 interceptions and took that really bad sack, he still had 393 passing yards in that game. So you know you're pretty good when you can have a bad game and still have close to 400 passing yards and win the game. That's just the upside that Patrick Mahomes offers you each and every single week. I just think at that price point in the tougher matchup versus the Saints, he's not a necessity in cash games. But I think the popular cash game quarterback as of right now it's only Tuesday, so I'm just guessing on ownership projections because we obviously don't have any of those out yet, but after the game Lamar Jackson had on Monday night versus the Cleveland Browns, and that obviously broke my heart when he came back in with like 2 minutes left after McSorley, I think it was the ACL injury, something like that, just comes in like Superman and just breaks my heart. As you can see, I have the Browns hoodie on right now. Absolutely phenomenal game. Now, that was probably the best football game I've ever watched. Unfortunately, my Browns did not come out on top, but hey, I can respect a good game, and that was absolutely awesome to watch. And hats off to Lamar Jackson for coming in like that and just winning the game like that. Absolutely insane. But yeah, he's a great option here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, one of the worst defenses in football. He's had 2 really good matchups the past 2 weeks versus the Browns defense and the Dallas Cowboys, and he's looked great the past 2 weeks. I know he's been struggling overall this year, but he's trending in the right direction. The good matchups just keep piling up here, and I would not be surprised if he has a great game. He had over 120 rushing yards versus the Browns last night. Didn't crack 200 passing yards, but hey, if you're going to run the ball like 10, 15 times and get over 100 rushing yards and find the end zone on the ground 1 or 2 times, you don't have to throw the ball for 200 yards. So definitely like Lamar Jackson here on the season, just south of 70 rushing yards per game, close to double-digit rushing attempts per game, although the past 5 weeks or 5 or 6 weeks now, he's ran the ball over 10 times per game. So like the upside here for Lamar Jackson. He's finding his groove right now. And the Jaguars are 32nd DVA versus the pass, and they're allowing the 4th most points per game to the quarterback position. And they also suck on the ground as well, because I really don't care how the defenses are versus the pass when it comes to Lamar Jackson. I'm more really just concerned on how they are versus the ground. But fortunately, the Jaguars are bad in all aspects, so I think Jackson is definitely a phenomenal play if you can afford him. Ravens also have one of the highest implied team totals on the slate at 30 points. And I know they're 13.5 point favorites, but they don't really have another quarterback. Now, they're going to be bringing up a guy, but still, I would assume Lamar Jackson's probably going to be in the entire game outside of just randomly getting injured. Then dropping down to Kyler Murray at $7,000. He's trending in the wrong direction. Lamar Jackson, he's trending up. Kyler Murray, he's fallen off. He's definitely fallen off from the beginning of the season. Kyler Murray was just kind of like a lock play each and every single week. And if this was like about a month or 2 ago and we saw Kyler Murray at $7,000, I'm sure we would be all over this, but he just really hasn't been the same quarterback recently. Now, he did run the ball 13 times last game, which was nice to see, but really the rushing just the damage he was doing on the ground early in the year has not really been there. He's also not been that fantastic through the air, but I do think he's a fine play at $7,000 because Philly doesn't really concern me too much, and I think he's interesting at this price point because I feel like it might be getting a little bit too low. I'm still viewing him as a tournament option, but the way he runs the ball, and we did see him run the ball over 10 times last week, which was nice after, back-to-back games, not running the ball over 10 times, so if he's going to run the ball again like that, I think that certainly puts him in play because he gives him a nice floor and a high ceiling as well. But Kenyon Drake's been scoring all the rushing touchdowns. And earlier in the year, I was kind of saying these rushing touchdowns, I don't think they're going to just keep happening each and every single week for Kyler Murray, but they were. And Kenyon Drake wasn't really getting to the end zone. That's kind of flip-flop now where Kyler Murray is not getting into the end zone on the ground and Kenyon Drake's scoring each and every single week. So maybe that starts to even back out again. Not totally sure. But if he doesn't get all those rushing yards and rushing touchdowns, he's certainly not going to be too viable because he's not really someone I'm going to expect to come out here and throw for 300 and 3 or 4 passing touchdowns. Although he's got the upside for that. He's got DeAndre Hopkins to get the ball to, and it's not that scary of a matchup versus Philly. It's just he is kind of trending in the wrong direction from what he was doing earlier in the season. Ryan Tannehill at $6,700. He is purely a tournament play just because they're 10.5 point favorites at home here, and this could be another big Derrick Henry week, and that's why I said last week Ryan Tannehill is firmly a tournament play. He had a good game versus Cleveland, but the game script got completely flipped because they were trailing by 30-some points in the first half in that game, so it was just kind of a pass-heavy approach for the Titans, but if they can get a lead early on, they're just going to ride Derrick Henry to a win. Like Henry had around 200 yards and found the end zone a couple of times in that game, absolutely went off. Had around close to 40 Draftkings points. I think he was just below that. But if that's going to happen again, they're not going to need Ryan Tannehill to air the ball out. So I view this as more of a big Derrick Henry game versus Detroit because Detroit could also be without Matthew Stafford. And if they don't have Matthew Stafford, I just really can't see the Lions being super competitive in this game despite the Titans defense not being that great. They have a team total of 31 this week, which I believe is the highest on the slate. High over-under game at 51.5, but they are 10.5 point favorites at home. So even though I do view this as more of a Derrick Henry game, if it somehow stays close or Ryan Tannehill's just stealing all the touchdowns from Henry, he could certainly be a strong play in a very good matchup because Detroit is just not a good defense overall. They're 31st DV versus the pass, and they're 25th versus quarterbacks this season. So even though they're only throwing the ball 31 times per game, it's definitely a run-first offense. I still think there's upside there if he's efficient and if he just happens to be on the lucky side of variance for touchdowns. Then right below him for $100 less, we have Tom Brady at $6,600 and a similar over-under game at 50.5, but a tighter spread here at 6.5 points. And I actually think he's a solid play here versus Atlanta. Now, I don't really trust Tom Brady too much. He's definitely not looked that great throwing the ball this year, but this is a team that likes to throw the football around 40 times per game, and Ronald Jones might miss this game. He's having a procedure done on his, I believe it's his finger, so if he happens to miss this game, which it sounds like he could, it could definitely be a pass-heavy approach for this offense, which is something they've been doing all season long, but he's got good weapons to get the ball to. Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Gronk. And we know Atlanta's not a very good pass defense, although they've been getting a little bit better, and they are 14th DV versus the pass, but they're still dead last versus quarterbacks, allowing close to 26 Draftkings points per game. But that passing yards number used to be around 350. That's now below 300. So they have been improving, but still $6,600 and a good matchup versus Atlanta. I do think he is viable, and he's got good weapons to get the ball to. Jared Goff at $6,300. Fantastic matchup versus the Jets. Anytime you see the Jets on the schedule, you can certainly look at the quarterback playing them. The only concern is when you play the Jets is that the game can certainly get out of hand. We saw that last week but the Seattle Seahawks, they were facing the Jets, and we ended up seeing Geno Smith get into that game late. So it's kind of hard to hit your upside when you really the game's probably not going to be too competitive, and I would not be surprised if this ends up being a blowout. They're 16.5 point favorites at home, but a super high implied team total here at 30.5, and the Rams have a pretty good defense. So the only concern here is that definitely could be a blowout, but he's got good weapons to get the ball to in Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. So you know who to stack with Jared Goff, although this could be a big Cam Akers game. But the Jets, they're allowing the second most points per game to the quarterback position, close to 300 passing yards per game, and they're 24th DVA versus the pass, which is actually up a few spots. They were 32nd a couple of weeks ago. That's not the case anymore, but still not a good defense whatsoever. And I would assume that winless streak continues for the New York Jets. Although I would hope they stay competitive, because if that game happened to stay competitive somehow, not really expecting it to, but if it did, Jared Goff could definitely put up like close to 400 yards and probably 3 to 4 touchdowns. Just definitely some concerns there, but I do like that price point. Then Jalen Hurts, $5,900, had a nice little debut as getting his first NFL start with the Eagles, and they beat the Saints, one of the best teams in the NFL. That was really impressive for Jalen Hurts, and I definitely think he's in play here below $6,000 just because of the rushing upside that he offers us, because he ran the ball 18 times in that game last week for over 100 yards, not getting to the end zone, but he had 23 8.3 fantasy points. If he runs the ball like he did last week, that's definitely going to make him playable each and every single week, because that's just a lot of rushing attempts for a quarterback, and he's below $6,000. Not sure he's going to put up the biggest yardage numbers through the air, but he doesn't have to if he's going to run the ball like that. Now, the matchup versus Arizona, it's not great. They're 9th DVA versus the pass, and they're allowing the 12th fewest points per game to the quarterback position, so I'm not expecting a huge gain through the air for Jalen Hurts, but I just want that rushing upside, and below $6,000, I think he's got a pretty safe floor, and I think he'd be pretty good on a point per dollar basis here this week, so I definitely think he is in play. And with that being said, I think we can move on to the running back position and start breaking that down. I don't really think it's a great week for the running backs, as I don't really have many players listed here, but we do have an obvious option up top in Derrick Henry at $9,500. The only problem is he is breaking the bank here, nearly $10,000. But I mean, he went off last week, and it's a very similar scenario this week versus Detroit, like it was last week versus Jacksonville. It's also December, and this is when he tends to play his best football late in the season when defenses are tired. The guy's just huge. He's hard to tackle, and I don't know what it is. He just likes playing football late in the year, and I just don't see how he doesn't crush here versus Detroit. They suck defensively versus the run and versus the pass, but it's just such a similar scenario to last week, where he's facing a very poor defense. They're large favorites. They're 10.5-point favorites at home here. They have a 31-point implied team total, which is, I believe, the highest on the entire slate. He crushed last week, so that's going to inflate his ownership. He scored nearly 40 Draftkings points, had over 200 rushing yards, had 2 touchdowns. I mean, the guy's just a monster, and I don't really see who's going to be able to stop him on Detroit here. I mean, should get around 30 touches, and they rank 31st versus running backs this season. That means they're allowing the second most points per game to the position, and they're 26th DVA versus the run. So Derrick Henry, I think we're probably looking at around 150, maybe he hits it again, around 200 rushing yards in this game, and probably he's going to get to the end zone 1 or 2 times, maybe catches 1 or 2 balls, but I'm not really concerned with what he does through the air. That's the only problem with Derrick Henry. It's hard to play him because Draftkings is a PPR site. He's better suited for FanDuel just because I believe they're half. I don't play over on FanDuel. I'm pretty sure they're half point per reception. And Draftkings, you get a point per reception. So a guy that doesn't catch the ball, like if they happen to fall behind, it's going to kind of kill his upside like we saw versus Cleveland. But I don't really see a scenario where the Titans fall behind here in this game, especially if Matthew Stafford doesn't play. Also Kenny Galladay. So not really have too many concerns here, and assuming the Titans play with the lead, I think Derrick Henry absolutely smashes. I know he's super expensive, but if you have enough value this week to be able to fit him in and build around him, that's probably going to end up being the way to go, because I would not be surprised if he gets close to 40 DraftKings points. Again, I'm not point chasing here. It's just such another good matchup. I mean, he had Jacksonville last week, one of the best matchups you can ask for. Now he gets Detroit, one of the best matchups you can ask for. I mean, David Montgomery scored around 30 DraftKings points versus these guys. And then dropping down to the mid-tier, we have Alvin Kamara at $7,400. And finally, he was finally involved in the passing game last week. That was absolutely awesome to see. Now, the Saints were trailing in that game, which I guess would help that, but they could certainly be trailing here versus Kansas City, although I'm pretty sure this is going to be a pretty tight game. But if Taysom Hill is going to use Alvin Kamara through the air again, at $7,400, I think that's a steal, especially on the ground versus Kansas City. They are not a good run defense. So far this season, they're 30th DVA versus the run, and they're 21st versus running backs, and allowing over 100 rushing yards per game. And also, about 5.5 catches and 50 receiving yards per game, which is right in Alvin Kamara's wheelhouse. Now, I think we all know that Taysom Hill has kind of killed Alvin Kamara's fantasy value the past few weeks. He's just not really getting the ball through the air, where he had 10 targets last week and 7 catches for only 44 yards, but still on a PPR site, I mean, 7 catches, that's awesome. That's 7 points. And if you're looking at recent weeks with Taysom Hill, he had 1 target, 2 targets, 3 targets, but all the way up to 10 last week. So if that continues, $7,400, I would take that all day. So I do think he's a pretty solid play at that price point, and a good matchup versus Kansas City. Should be a high scoring game as well, 50.5 over under, and it should be an exciting one too. It's a 425 game. I'll definitely be looking forward to watching that. Then Jonathan Taylor, $7,200, went absolutely off last week versus Las Vegas Raiders. Like absolutely went off. Had over 30 DraftKings points at a sub 6K price point. Now they priced him all the way up at $7,200, so he's definitely not. I don't really think he's a cash play, because they did price him all the way up, and we're still going to see Nyheim Hines involved, so it's not like he's going to be the absolute workhorse here. But if he's going to get us 20 plus touches, so he had 20 carries on the ground last week and get a couple of targets, it's a great matchup versus Houston. I mean, running backs have been killing Houston all season long. We saw David Montgomery in the first play of scrimmage last week, or not last week, I mean, technically last week, but a couple of days ago. Montgomery took it to the house for an 80-yard touchdown. I didn't really give him the ball after that, which was weird, but I mean, that Houston defense is nothing to be scared of. They're 29th DVA versus the run, and they're now allowing the most DraftKings points per game to the position. They were 30th. I believe the Packers were 31 and Lions were 32. somewhere around there, but the Texans are now dead last, 32nd versus running back. So yeah, great spot for Taylor. About 140 yards on the ground allowed over a rushing touchdown. Also kind of getting beat up through the air as well. So if Taylor's going to get us 20 plus touches here, and they are 7.5-point favorites at home, I can see this being another big Jonathan Taylor game, although I feel like people aren't going to want to play him above $7,000. So I do think as of right now he's a good tournament play, although maybe ownership says something else. But again, it's early in the week, so kind of just my first thoughts on the slate. Cam Akers, $6,600. Another guy who's just kind of turning it up a notch. Both rookies here. But yeah, Akers has been the main guy for the Rams the past couple of weeks now. And the guy looks good. And if we're looking at the volume for him the past 2 weeks, 21 carries versus Arizona, then 29 on Thursday night versus the New England Patriots, had close to 200 rushing yards, did not find the end zone, added a couple targets in there as well, but he's in a great spot here versus the Jets. Now, the Jets are worse versus the pass than they are versus the run. As you can see, they're 8th DVA versus the run, but they're still 20th versus running backs, not allowing over 100 rushing yards per game, but at 16.5-point favorites here. I mean, if the Rams get a lead, which they should, I think we can see another big game from Cam Akers, probably getting 20 plus touches on the ground. If he finds the end zone, I think he'll pay off $600. So I'd say he's a nice, solid mid-range running back this week in a phenomenal spot, game flow wise, versus the Jets. Kenyon Drake, $5,500, kind of already talked about him earlier. He's been getting a lot of touchdowns the past month or so, and actually putting up some decent fantasy games, so I think he's just a fine volume play. Now, the matchup versus Philly, they're kind of tough on running backs, 13th DVA versus the run, allowing the 10th fewest points per game to the position, but Drake, he gets plenty of volume. We should see around 16 to 20 touches for him here. Maybe more if game flow works in his favor, but they are 6.5-point favorites at home here with a decently high team total at 27.5, so I think Drake is a fine, cheapish / mid-range running back to save some money on. And Salvon Ahmed here at $4,700. Now, this is not like an official play because there's a chance he could not play in this game. But if he's good to go, Myles Gaskin's more than likely going to miss this game. He's only $4,700, and New England's not that good versus running backs. They're 28 DV versus the run. Now, when it comes to the fantasy point department, they're mid-range, 14 fewest points per game, but still not a defense I'm too scared of to attack on the ground. And assuming Gaskin's out, and if Ahmed's back, I mean, he's a fine play at $4,700. He was the guy that was at least a little bit fantasy relevant when all those other running backs were out, and he was kind of in the starting role, so I definitely think he would be in play at that price point. Because there's not really that many value running backs I like this week, so if you just want to throw in your flex spot, if we get positive news throughout the week, again, it's only Tuesday, so we're kind of just spitballing here a little bit, but I definitely think he could become a play later on in the week. And moving on to the wide receiver position up top, we have the super expensive Tyreek Hill. He is just shy of $9,000. Had 2 touchdowns last week, and look, the guy's just great. He's been pretty safe all season long. That's not something you could usually say about Tyreek Hill. Like, the guy's obviously phenomenal, one of the best wide receivers in football for fantasy, but he could always be a little bit hit or miss, but he's been very consistent so far this season. He seems to score a touchdown every single week, and he's really only had one bad game this season. I think it was back in week 4 or 5, whatever it was, versus Buffalo. He only had 5 points in that game, but besides that, he's been over double digits, and we've seen monster games from him. We've seen him score 60 points in a game. That's just the upside that he offers you each and every single week. Now, the matchup versus New Orleans is definitely not my favorite. Like I mentioned earlier, they're pretty tough versus the pass, 2nd DVOA, and only allowing the 8th fewest points for the wide receiver position. But Tyreek Hill is a matchup nightmare, mismatch nightmare. I don't know what the word I'm trying to look for, but he's a nightmare for any opposing corner. So, I mean, he can just burn a defense deep, and it only takes a play for him to break a slate with an 80-yard touchdown like we've seen a couple of times this year. And on the year, about 24% target share, close to a 40% market share of the team's air yards, about 9 targets per game, and close to 90 receiving yards and over a receiving touchdown per game. So I'm assuming he's going to find the end zone at some point in this game. It's just going to depend on if he gets into the end zone a couple of times, or if he gets like 10 catches in this game compared to 4, because he's very pricey at $9,000. This is like Devontae Adams range, and I always feel like Adams is a much safer play than Tyreek Hill, just because I feel like I can count on him scoring, getting 10 catches more so than Tyreek Hill, and Hill's averaging less than 6 catches per game, so I guess that would be the correct take there. But he's fine play for tournaments, but I don't think you have to jam him in at $9,000 in cash games this week. A.J. Brown, $7,600. Him and Corey Davis are kind of taking turns going off here, but he had a great game last week, and he gets another really good matchup here versus Detroit. Only concern here is that they are 10.5-point favorites, so if he doesn't do a lot of damage early on and they're up by like, I don't know, 20 points, they're probably not going to air the ball out to A.J. Brown, and he can certainly make some big plays. Like we know he's definitely a down the field threat. On the season, he's got a 35% market share of the team's air yards, but highest implied team total here, I'm expecting a lot of points to be scored from the Tennessee Titans, and I would say A.J. Brown's one of the most talented wide receivers in football. I mean, I wouldn't say he's as consistent as he needs to be yet to be up in that upper echelon tier, but he certainly has the upside for that, and it's a great matchup versus Detroit. They're 31st DVA versus the pass, and they're on the 4th most points per game to the wide receiver position, so I think Brown's a fine tournament play. I don't think you have to go there in cash games, just because I never feel like A.J. Brown's a great cash game wide receiver unless he was cheaper. I remember earlier in the season, I think we got A.J. Brown at, I want to say it was like 54, 5,600. Those days are gone now. We have to pay a premium for him, and it's deserved. The guy's a fantastic wide receiver. I think he's going to be a great wide receiver for years to come, but just a bit pricey for me, and with them being 10.5-point favorites on a team that likes to run the football versus passing the football. And after that, we have the Rams wide receiver group in Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. I say this every single week, like literally every single week, so I'm pretty sure you guys know what I'm going to say, but I feel like they're the same exact play, but if one's cheaper, I'm going to go with the other, and that's usually Robert Woods, and he's $200 cheaper here than Cooper Kupp, but both are very, very good plays and similar plays. They're both averaging around the same catches per game, close to the same target share, and pretty much very, very identical numbers. Similar ADOTs, they're both possession wide receivers, so you're never really going to see like a 50-yard bomb to one of these guys unless they like catch a drag route across the field and just happen to turn it up. But overall, I think they're still solid plays. I don't really think the Jets have anyone to be able to stop them. They're 27th versus wide receivers and 24th DVA versus the pass. Again, only concern here is that they are massive favorites at home. If the game gets out of hand, they're probably not throwing the ball too much late in the third quarter and the fourth quarter, but excellent matchups and two great wide receivers for DraftKings because they are kind of possession wide receivers, which always works well on a PPR site. Then right below that, we have Brandon Ayuk at $6,300, who hasn't had a bad game in quite some time. And he's coming off a game with 16 targets. Like the guy's obviously really talented. And he's going to be a fun one to watch. But with Deebo Samuel being out, it just kind of solidifies things as the offense is going to run through Brandon Ayuk through the air. And I'm looking forward to this game. It's a good matchup versus Dallas. They're 25th versus wide receivers, and they're 25th DA versus the pass. I have really no concerns here whatsoever for Brandon Ayuk. I know his price is up at $6,300, but I still think he's a pretty solid play on a point per dollar basis. If he's going to get us 10-plus targets, the guy's a talented wide receiver. It's a great matchup versus Dallas. He kind of checks all the boxes for me, and he's got a main player out in the offense, which is going to boost his role as well. So definitely in on Ayuk here. Corey Davis, 5,800, bit of a letdown after his monster game versus Cleveland. When I say a bit of a letdown, it was definitely a big letdown. He only had, less than 6 points, I believe, which is certainly not what we were looking for at close to $6,000. And it's kind of a similar scenario here. It's a great matchup. It's just they're large favorites. So if the game gets out of hand, they're probably not going to be throwing the ball too much in the second half. It's going to be pretty much a Derrick Henry game. But if he can do some damage early on, I love the matchup versus Detroit. I kind of already mentioned it, so I don't think I have to go over it again. But he's much cheaper than A.J. Brown, which is always going to make Corey Davis look like a better point per dollar play. And they both have upside. Both are pretty good wide receivers. Just kind of, I think Brown's the tournament play, and I'd say Corey Davis is more of a cash game play, although I feel like they're both a little bit more tournament-ish this week with them being such large favorites. T.Y. Hilton, $5,500. I guess he's back now. That's, 3 games in a row where he scored touchdowns and overall had some pretty solid fantasy games. Plus, he's playing the Houston Texans, and he's always had a good track record versus Houston. Now, the majority of those games were with Andrew Luck at quarterback, and Phillip Rivers is not as good as Andrew Luck, but he did recently have a good game versus Houston. This is not a good pass defense, or just a good defense whatsoever. They're suck versus the run and versus the pass. This season, they're 30th DVA versus the pass, and they rank 24th versus wide receivers. And they also have a 29-point implied team total, which is one of the higher ones on the slate. They are 7.5-point favorites, but that's not a super large spread, so I'm not super concerned about that. And Deshaun Watson can keep a team in a game and keep the Texans offense in the game no matter what. He should get Brandon Cooks back, which should help the Texans stay at least a little bit more competitive here. But I definitely like the spot here for T.Y. Hilton at that price point. And Lynn Bowden here at $3,600. I actually think he's a really strong value play as long as a couple of things happen. So as of right now, the Miami Dolphins offense, it could be without Myles Gaskin, Devontae Parker, Grant, and Gesicki, which that would be a lot of bodies off the field. So that would definitely open up the door here, or open up some more opportunity for Lynn Bowden here at less than $4,000. And he actually led the team in targets last week. And his role seems to be expanding. Another cool thing is that he actually went to high school like 30 minutes away from me, and he played quarterback. He's a very dynamic player. So I definitely think he has a shot of really paying off his price point here at $3,600. Matchup versus New England this year, they are 21st DVA versus the pass, and allowing the third fewest points per game to the wide receiver position. But it's mainly just a price thing here, and it looks like there could be a lot of bodies out for the Miami Dolphins. The ball's got to go somewhere, and he's a pretty good player. He's learning the playbook more. I know he was a late addition to the Miami Dolphins roster because he was originally drafted to the Las Vegas Raiders, but it seems like he's got a grasp of the playbook now, and again, I like that price point, so pretty good point per dollar option as of right now, in my opinion. Then moving on to the tight end position, obviously we always have to have Travis Kelce listed here as long as he's on the main site, and he is this week, but his price is the highest we've seen it all season long at $8,000 now, but it's deserved, to be honest, because when he was around $7,000, I remember at some point I think he was in the 6K range. I know I don't really like spending it for tight ends, but it was a lot easier to fit him in, and he seems to go off each and every single week. He's just such a safe, consistent play. He's nearly tops in the league at the receiving yards, and the guy's a tight end. It's just absolutely insane. But he's on a fantastic offense, and defenses can't just key on Travis Kelce, because if you do that, Tyreek Hill's going to beat you over the top, and plus he's got the best quarterback in the game throwing the football, which always helps things. But a bit of a tougher matchup here versus the Saints, like I mentioned earlier. They're kind of mid-range versus tight ends, so I guess it's maybe a little bit of a soft spot for the Saints. But again, it's Travis Kelce. No team really has anybody that can guard him too well. 9 targets per game, close to 7 catches, close to 100 receiving yards, which is absolutely insane for a tight end. 25% market share of the team's air yards. Yeah, he's a fantastic play if you have the money for him, but at that price point, I'm viewing him as more of a tournament play. Mark Andrews at $5,500 didn't have the biggest game in the world last week versus Cleveland, but he kind of came alive at the end where he had a couple of those catches. I believe that was the drive where he got the game-winning field goal, if I remember correctly. But he's a fine play versus Jacksonville. It's an overall poor defense. And if I'm going to pair anybody with Lamar, you can certainly play Lamar naked. He's averaging less than 200 passing yards per game. I'm just mostly concerned what he does on the ground. But Andrews, he'll be the top target for me, and I'd say he's got the best chance of catching a touchdown from Lamar. So he's in play for that. But at that price point, if you're an expensive tight end, I usually view you as a tournament play more so than a cash play. But $5,500 isn't really breaking the bank in a good matchup versus Jacksonville. Logan Thomas, $4,000. Don't really care who the quarterback's going to be. He's just been kind of a consistent play for about a month now. And he's always had a role in this offense. I mean, it's nothing crazy, but the past 3 weeks, 10 points, 24, and 13, which I know doesn't sound great. But again, he's only around $4,000. So I would definitely take that at that price point. Now, the matchup versus Seattle, they've been one of the worst pass defenses in the league this year, although they have been improving a bit. They're now 19th DVA versus the pass. And they are kind of tough versus tight ends, allowing the 8th fewest points per game to the position, but it's mainly just a price play here, and he tends to always have a role. About a 17% target share and 42% wide opportunity share, and around a 22% market share of the team's air yards, so not that bad. Jordan Reed at $3,200. Now, this is only contingent on George Kittle not playing. It sounds like George Kittle might be back. If that's the case, I'm probably not going to be too interested in Jordan Reed, although there is a scenario where if George Kittle does return, is he really going to play much? Maybe he sees like 15-20% of the snaps, and if that's the case, I still think Reed would be playable at $3,200, and it's a good matchup versus Dallas, and I mean, he's involved in the offense, and I think $3,200 is just a bit too cheap. And also, Deebo Samuel's going to be out, so I guess that just opens up some more targets to go around this offense. And they're 25th versus the pass. Kind of tough on tight ends, allowing the 10th fewest points for getting into the position, but this is mainly just a price play. I mean, he's a talented tight end. It's just he's always dealt with injuries in his career. Then Cole Kmet, $3,000, back-to-back weeks with 7 targets, and he's still really cheap. But week 13 versus Detroit, 14.7 points, and last week versus Houston, he had 8.1. If you get that kind of production for a guy that's $3,000 at a position that's usually hard to find points at, we would take that all day. So I think Cole Kmet's actually one of the better plays at tight ends this week. It's a good matchup versus Minnesota, and they're kind of mid-pack versus tight ends, but it's not a defense I'm too concerned about. But mainly just a price play here, and he's been getting targets, and he's been out snapping Jimmy Graham. So I definitely think Cole Kmet is in play here. He's definitely had his snaps and volume or production in the passing game definitely been ramped up the past couple of weeks. Then as for the defenses, really don't like talking about defenses. I mean, they just try to pick favorites here, but the Rams, they're facing the Jets. I think that's obvious. Only a 14-point implied team total against them. Titans, always a good correlation play with Derrick Henry, because if you're playing Derrick Henry, you want the Titans to be winning that game so that you can just pound the rock with Derrick Henry. So I think they're in play versus Detroit, especially if Matthew Stafford doesn't happen to play. Seahawks defense, they're facing the Washington football team. It sounds like Alex Smith's going to be back, but again, they're just a little bit too cheap. I'm not that scared of their offense. And then the Buccaneers defense, $3,000. I know they really haven't been as impressive as they were earlier in the year, but they're facing Atlanta. Matt Ryan has just not been playing good football. especially without Julio Jones. So if Julio Jones is out, I mean, that just makes the Buccaneers defense even a little bit of a better play. But that's pretty much going to be it. So I hope this video was helpful, guys. If it was, make sure to leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. I think now if you want to follow me on social media, you can do that as well. ChrisPennell16 on Twitter, CPenn16 on IG. Going to help support the channel over on Patreon. You can do that link down below. I do show you guys a preview of it, but if you want the entire thing with projections, cheat sheets, notes on each and every single player that I have interest in, also hop into the Discord chat and bug me all day if you want. That's always available in the link down below. So I think that's it. I'm going to get out of here, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week.